"Drink this. It'll help you sleep better," my daughter-in-law insisted, handing me the tea with that sweet smile that I now realize was about as genuine as a $3 bill. Each night, I felt weaker, my vision blurrier. At 3 a.m., I secretly collected samples in mason jars, because nothing says I'm losing my mind quite like hoarding tea in the basement like some caffeinated squirrel. The lab results arrived Tuesday. Instead of collapsing that evening, I walked into dinner with my lawyer and said just a couple words that would change everything forever. But let me start from the beginning, because this story, like most family disasters, didn't happen overnight. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 68 years old, and until 8 months ago, I thought I had this whole life thing figured out. I'd been married to my Harold for 42 beautiful years. We had our little suburban house with the garden Harold tended like it was his personal corner of Eden, and our son David, who we'd raised to be, well, let's just say we thought we'd done a decent job. Then Harold died. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning while he was watering his prized tomatoes. The doctors said it was quick, which I suppose was meant to be comforting. Harold would have appreciated the irony. He spent all that time worrying about cholesterol and ended up keeling over next to vegetables he'd never get to harvest. Suddenly, I was alone in a house that felt about as welcoming as a mausoleum. Every corner held a memory. Every room echoed with 42 years of, "Good morning, honey," and "Did you remember to lock the back door?" The silence was so thick you could practically spread it on toast. That's when Sarah stepped in. Sarah is my daughter-in-law, married to my son David for 3 years now. Picture the perfect wife from a 1950s magazine, always put together, always saying the right thing, always ready with a casserole or a helpful suggestion. The kind of woman who probably irons her pajamas and alphabetizes her spice rack. "Mom," she said to me one afternoon about 2 weeks after the funeral, using that voice people reserve for talking to small children and the recently bereaved, "You can't stay in this big house all by yourself. It's not safe." Now, I should mention that David had just gotten transferred to a new position across town, a promotion that came with longer hours and more stress. Sarah was quick to point out that this meant they were closer to me now. How convenient. "Why don't you come stay with us temporarily?" she suggested, her eyes doing that concerned daughter-in-law thing. "Just until you figure out what you want to do long term. We have that lovely guest room, and I could take care of you while you're grieving." Take care of me. At 68, I'd been taking care of myself and everyone else for decades, but apparently widowhood had automatically enrolled me in the helpless elderly category. The house sale happened faster than I'd expected. The real estate market was hot, they said, and cash offers were flying around like confetti at a parade. Within 6 weeks, I'd gone from homeowner to houseguest with $150,000 in the bank and a monthly pension of $2,500. Not rich by any stretch, but comfortable enough for a woman whose biggest expenses were groceries and the occasional book. Sarah made moving in feel like a slumber party for senior citizens. "We're going to have so much fun, Mom," she'd say, showing me where to put my things in what was clearly meant to be temporary storage. "We can cook together, watch movies, really get to know each other better." And we did cook together. Sarah was quite the chef, always trying new recipes, always fussing over my nutrition. "You're not eating enough," she'd cluck, loading my plate with another helping. "Grief can really affect appetite, but we need to keep your strength up." She was particularly concerned about my sleep. "You look so tired, Mom. Are you having trouble sleeping?" This was usually asked around 9 p.m., just as I was settling in with a book or watching the evening news. "I sleep fine," I'd say, which was mostly true. Sure, I missed Harold's gentle snoring and the familiar weight of him next to me, but I wasn't exactly lying awake staring at the ceiling. That's when Sarah introduced her special tea. "This is a blend my grandmother used to make," she explained, presenting me with a steaming mug that smelled like flowers and herbs. Chamomile, lavender, passion flower, all natural ingredients that help with relaxation and grief processing. Perfect for someone who's been through what you have. Grief processing. Apparently, even my emotions needed professional management now. The tea tasted, well, like flowers. Not unpleasant, but not exactly Earl Grey either. Kind of bitter underneath all that floral sweetness, like life itself if you think about it too philosophically. "Drink it all down," Sarah would encourage, sitting with me at the kitchen table like we were having some sacred mother-daughter bonding ritual. The herbs work better when you get the full dose. And I did drink it all down every night because Sarah had gone to the trouble of making it and because it seemed like such a small thing to do for someone who was being so kind to me. That's when things started getting interesting. Within a week of the nightly tea routine, I noticed I was more tired during the day. Not sleepy exactly, but that bone-deep exhaustion that makes you feel like you're moving through molasses. My vision started getting a bit fuzzy, too. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make me squint at the newspaper or hold it farther away. "Maybe you need your prescription updated," Sarah suggested helpfully. "Stress can really affect eyesight." Then came the dizzy spells. Nothing major, just little moments where the room would tilt slightly, like being on a boat in calm waters. And my memory, well, let's just say I started understanding why people my age worry about forgetting where they put their keys. "It's completely normal," Sarah assured me when I mentioned these symptoms. "Grief affects people physically as much as emotionally. Plus, you're adjusting to a new environment, new routines. Your body is just processing all these changes." She had an answer for everything. That's Sarah. Like a medical textbook with perfect hair and a concerned expression. The family seemed to accept my gradual decline as par for the course. "Mom's having a hard time since Dad died," David would explain to relatives who called. "Sarah's taking such good care of her, though. I don't know what we'd do without her." My sister Helen visited once and commented that I looked frail. "Are you eating enough, Maggie?" she asked with that worried frown I remembered from childhood. "She picks at her food," Sarah said before I could answer. "I keep trying to get her to eat more, but you know how stubborn she can be." Stubborn. There's a word that can mean either admirably determined or unreasonably difficult, depending on who's using it and why. After 6 weeks of this new routine, I had to admit I wasn't feeling like myself. The energetic woman who used to volunteer at the library and tend her own garden had been replaced by someone who needed help remembering whether she'd taken her vitamins and couldn't read for more than 20 minutes without her eyes watering. "Maybe I should see a doctor," I suggested one evening after nearly tripping over the coffee table I'd walked around successfully for 6 weeks. "That's a wonderful idea," Sarah agreed immediately. "I'll make the appointment and drive you. We want to make sure you're getting the best care possible." She did make the appointment, and she did drive me. She also accompanied me into the examination room and answered half the doctor's questions before I could open my mouth. "She's been very tired and confused lately," Sarah explained to Dr. Patterson, who'd been Harold's doctor for years but had never seen me looking quite so diminished. "I'm worried about depression, maybe early cognitive decline. She's been through such trauma." Dr. Patterson, bless him, did look concerned. He ran some basic tests, checked my blood pressure, asked about my sleep and appetite. Everything seemed normal enough, considering my recent loss and major life changes. "Grief can manifest in many physical ways," he told us both. "What you're describing sounds like a normal adjustment process, but let's keep monitoring it. Are you taking any new medications or supplements?" "Just the herbal tea Sarah makes for me," I said, "for sleep." "All natural ingredients," Sarah added quickly. "Nothing pharmaceutical." Dr. Patterson nodded approvingly. Natural remedies were trending, even in medical circles. "Well, keep doing what you're doing," he said. "Time heals, as they say, and you're fortunate to have such a caring daughter-in-law." Yes, fortunate. That was exactly the word I would have chosen. But here's the thing about gradual changes. They're like watching grass grow or paint dry. You don't notice them happening until someone points them out, or until something makes you see the situation differently. For me, that something was an afternoon visit from David. He'd been working late almost every night since his promotion, the kind of schedule that turns grown men into caffeine-dependent zombies. That particular Tuesday, he showed up around 4 p.m. looking like he'd been run over by a truck, carrying stress and deadlines. "Rough day, honey?" I asked, feeling that familiar maternal urge to fix whatever was wrong with my boy, even though my boy was now 35 and supposedly capable of fixing his own problems. "The Peterson account is driving me insane," he groaned, slumping into Harold's old recliner. "I can't think straight anymore. My brain feels like it's wrapped in cotton." Now, as any mother knows, there's nothing quite like seeing your child suffer to activate that helpful gene that makes us want to cook something, offer advice, or provide some form of comfort that may or may not actually help. "Let me make you something relaxing," I said, already heading toward the kitchen. "Sarah always makes me this wonderful herbal tea for stress. She says it's her grandmother's special recipe." And that's how I ended up serving my own nightly poison to my son. We sat together in the living room, David nursing his mug of what I now know was a carefully crafted cocktail of toxins, while I felt genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. Here was my son, letting me take care of him like I used to when he was small and scraped knees were the worst thing that could happen to a person. "This is nice, Mom," he said, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. 3 hours later, my phone rang. "Mom," David's voice sounded shaky. "I feel terrible, really dizzy and nauseous. My head is pounding and I can't seem to focus on anything. Maybe that tea was too strong or something?" I felt my stomach drop about 6 floors. "Oh, honey, maybe you're just exhausted from work." "I don't think it's that," he interrupted. "I feel really weird. Kind of like I can't think straight and I'm incredibly thirsty. Did you put sugar in that tea? My mouth tastes like metal." Metallic taste, excessive thirst, dizziness, confusion. Those were exactly the symptoms I'd been experiencing every single night for 6 weeks. The symptoms everyone kept telling me were normal for someone my age going through grief and major life changes. But David was 35, healthy, and had only had 1 cup of tea. "I'm sure you'll feel better in the morning," I managed to say, though my heart was starting to pound in a way that had nothing to do with my age or grief. "Yeah, probably," David agreed. "Good thing you don't react to your tea like this, Mom. I'd hate to feel this way every night." I hung up the phone and sat very still in the kitchen, staring at the flowered mug Sarah had given me for my nightly dose of relaxation. The problem was, I did feel like that every night. The dizziness, the confusion, the bone-deep exhaustion that everyone attributed to my emotional state. What if it wasn't emotional at all? What if Sarah's grandmother's special recipe was more special than anyone realized? But here's where this story takes a turn that even I didn't see coming, because the next morning, David called again. The next morning, David called at 8:30 a.m., which was unusual because he was typically already at the office by then, caffeinating himself into productivity. "Mom, I feel completely normal today," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "Whatever was in that tea really knocked me out yesterday, but I'm fine now. Weird, right?" Weird didn't begin to cover it. "I'm so glad you're feeling better, honey," I managed to say, while my brain was doing gymnastics that would have impressed Olympic judges. David had recovered completely overnight. Meanwhile, I'd been living in this fog of exhaustion and confusion for 6 weeks, and everyone, including me, had accepted it as my new normal. You know that moment in mystery novels when the detective suddenly realizes they've been looking at everything backwards? If you're enjoying this twisted family mystery, hit that like button. Trust me, it gets even more shocking from here. You know that moment in mystery novels when the detective suddenly realizes they've been looking at everything backwards? That the victim was actually the perpetrator, or the accident was actually murder? I was having one of those moments, except this wasn't a book I could close and put back on the shelf. This was my life, and someone was trying to end it. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Sarah served me my nightly dose of relaxation, and tried to think clearly for the first time in weeks, which, ironically, was harder than it should have been because my brain still felt like it was wrapped in cotton batting. But certain facts were becoming crystal clear. David had experienced severe symptoms after 1 cup of my tea. Those symptoms were identical to what I experienced every night. David had recovered completely in less than 12 hours. My symptoms had been building for 6 weeks and were getting worse. Either I was the unluckiest woman in medical history, or someone was poisoning me with the efficiency of a Swiss watch. 3 guesses who had access to my tea every single night. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not the kind of person who jumps to dramatic conclusions. I don't read true crime novels or watch those detective shows where everyone turns out to be a secret psychopath. Under normal circumstances, if you told me my daughter-in-law was trying to poison me, I would have suggested you lay off the caffeine and get more sleep. But these weren't normal circumstances, were they? I spent that entire day watching Sarah with new eyes. Not the grateful, slightly confused eyes of a grieving widow, but the sharp, calculating eyes of someone who suddenly realized she might be fighting for her life. Sarah went about her normal routine, making breakfast, tidying the house, chatting about her plans to reorganize the linen closet. She asked about my sleep, commented on my appetite, and expressed concern about my continued decline. "Maybe we should make another appointment with Dr. Patterson," she suggested while loading the dishwasher. "You seemed even more confused yesterday after David's visit. I'm worried you're not processing social interactions well." Not processing social interactions well. That's one way to describe discovering your caregiver might be your executioner. But here's the thing. I couldn't just come out and accuse her. What was I going to say? "Sarah, I think you're poisoning me because my son got sick from drinking my tea?" First of all, it sounded insane. Second, if I was right about what was happening, tipping my hand could be dangerous. If Sarah really was trying to kill me, what would she do if she knew I'd figured it out? No, I needed proof. Real, concrete, indisputable evidence that would convince a doctor, a lawyer, maybe even the police. I needed to think like a detective, not like a victim. That evening, Sarah prepared my tea with her usual cheerful efficiency. "Here you go, Mom. This blend should help with that restlessness you mentioned." Restlessness I hadn't actually mentioned, but we'll let that slide. I took the mug with my usual grateful smile. "Thank you, dear. You're so thoughtful." But instead of drinking it, I excused myself to use the bathroom. In the privacy of my small ensuite, I carefully poured most of the tea into a mason jar I'd hidden behind my extra towels. The rest I poured down the sink, then returned to the kitchen with an empty mug. "All done," I announced, setting the mug in the sink. "I think I'll head to bed early tonight." "Sleep well, Mom," Sarah said, giving me one of her perfect smiles. "Sweet dreams." If she only knew the kind of dreams I'd been having lately. I went to my room, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay in bed feeling more alert than I had in weeks, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. Around midnight, when I was sure Sarah and David were asleep, I crept out to the basement. Now, let me tell you, sneaking around your own temporary residence at midnight while carrying a mason jar full of potentially poisoned tea is not how I imagined spending my golden years. But there I was, hiding evidence like some geriatric Nancy Drew. I labeled the jar with the date and tucked it behind Harold's old toolbox, where no one would think to look. Then I went back upstairs and tried to sleep, which turned out to be remarkably easy when your system isn't processing whatever cocktail of toxins Sarah had been serving up. The next morning, I woke up feeling better than I had since moving in. Not perfect. Whatever had been building up in my system was still there, but clearer, more like myself. Sarah noticed immediately. "You look more rested today, Mom," she observed over breakfast, but there was something in her tone I hadn't heard before. A slight edge, like someone who'd expected different results from a science experiment. "I do feel a bit better," I admitted. "Maybe I'm finally adjusting to everything." She murmured, studying my face with the intensity of someone reading fine print. "Well, that's wonderful. We'll keep up with your routine. Make sure you maintain this progress. Keep up with my routine. Right. That night, I repeated my performance. Grateful acceptance of the tea, bathroom excuse, jar storage, empty mug return. But this time, I also did something else. While Sarah was in the shower, I went through her purse. I know. Going through someone's personal belongings is a violation of privacy and trust. But so is slowly murdering your mother-in-law with herbal tea, so I figured we were even. What I found made my blood run colder than a Minnesota winter. Tucked in a side compartment was a small notebook, the kind people use for shopping lists or phone numbers. But Sarah's lists were different. Week 1, no obvious effects, increased dosage slightly. Week 3, confusion and fatigue setting in, maintain current levels. Week 5, memory issues developing, Dr. P visit went well. Week 6, still too alert, need to adjust mixture. She was keeping a log, a scientific record of my deterioration. My hands were shaking as I photographed each page with the digital camera Harold had given me for Christmas 2 years ago. The one I'd barely used because who needs pictures when you have memories, right? Turns out memories can be unreliable when someone's poisoning your brain. But photographs don't lie. I found other things too. Internet printouts about natural remedies that were actually toxic plants, information about symptoms of various poisons, and most chilling of all, a handwritten note that said, inheritance laws, spouse versus adult children, research priority order. Inheritance laws. So this wasn't just about getting rid of an inconvenient mother-in-law, this was about money. I thought about my $150,000 nest egg, my monthly pension, my life insurance policy that named David as the beneficiary. I thought about Sarah's concern for my finances, her offers to help with paperwork, her suggestions that I get my affairs in order. How very helpful of her. But I also found something else in that purse, something that made me realize this was bigger than just Sarah's greed. A small envelope containing white powder with a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. From Mom, use sparingly, effects are cumulative. From Mom. Sarah's mother was involved in this. This wasn't just one woman's desperate plan, this was a family business. I carefully photographed everything, put the purse back exactly as I'd found it, and went to my room to think. But sleep was impossible now, not because of any lingering poison effects, but because my mind was racing with the horrible implications of what I'd discovered. How many elderly people had Sarah's family cared for over the years? How many convenient deaths had they orchestrated? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? I couldn't go to the police with photographs of someone's private notes and a mason jar of tea. I couldn't even prove the tea was poisoned. For all I knew, it could test negative for anything dangerous, and then I'd just look like a paranoid old woman. No, I needed more evidence, and I needed professional help. But first, I had to survive long enough to get it. The next few days were the most challenging performance of my life. I had to pretend to drink my nightly poison while secretly collecting samples. I had to act confused and tired, while actually feeling more alert than I had in weeks. I had to smile at Sarah and thank her for her care, while knowing she was systematically murdering me. It was like being in a play where only I knew it was actually a horror movie. Sarah was getting suspicious, though. She started commenting on my improved mental state with increasing frequency. "You seem much sharper today, Mom," she'd say, watching me complete a crossword puzzle I would have struggled with the week before. "I hope you're not overdoing it. Sometimes people have bursts of clarity before things get more challenging." Before things get more challenging. What a lovely euphemism for before you die. She also started being more insistent about the tea. "Make sure you drink it all," she'd say, sitting with me until the mug was empty, which made my substitution routine considerably more difficult. I had to get creative, using sleight of hand that would have impressed a magician, pretending to drink while actually palming the liquid in a cloth napkin I kept in my pocket. My laundry was getting interesting, let me tell you. By the end of the week, I had 5 mason jars hidden in the basement, a digital camera full of incriminating photographs, and a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. I was going to call Harold's old lawyer. Robert Chen had handled our wills, our house purchase, and various other legal matters over the years. He was discreet, smart, and most importantly, he'd known Harold and me when we were healthy, competent adults. If anyone would believe my story and know what to do about it, it would be Robert. But first, I needed to get those tea samples tested. On Friday morning, while Sarah was at her yoga class, apparently poisoning elderly relatives is stressful work, I took a bus to the other side of town and found a private laboratory. I need these water samples tested for toxins, I told the lab technician, using a fake name and paying in cash. I think someone might be contaminating our well. It wasn't entirely a lie. Someone was definitely contaminating something. Results will be ready in 5 business days, the technician informed me. We'll call the number you provided. I'd given them the number for the payphone at the library downtown. Old school, but effective. 5 business days. That meant I had to keep up my act for another week while potentially drinking poison every night. But I had a plan for that, too. You see, I'd been thinking about Sarah's notebook, about her scientific approach to my murder. She was monitoring my symptoms, adjusting dosages, keeping careful records, which meant she expected to see continued deterioration. If I suddenly got better, she'd know something was wrong. So I was going to have to give her what she expected to see. I was going to have to pretend to get sicker while actually protecting myself. It was going to require the performance of a lifetime. But then again, my life was literally depending on it. The following Monday, I started my decline. I'm feeling a bit dizzy today, I mentioned to Sarah over breakfast, while secretly feeling better than I had in months. Oh dear, she said, but I caught that little flash of satisfaction in her eyes. Maybe you should rest more today. I think I will, I agreed, then spent the day in my room reading mystery novels and planning my next move. Ironic choice of literature, perhaps, but I was learning a lot about evidence collection and police procedure. Tuesday, I pretended to have trouble remembering David's phone number. Wednesday, I accidentally called Sarah by my sister Helen's name. Thursday, I needed help reading the instructions on my vitamin bottle. Sarah was practically glowing with each manufactured symptom. I think we should make another appointment with Dr. Patterson, she suggested on Friday. Your condition seems to be progressing more rapidly. Progressing. Like I was advancing through stages of some natural disease instead of being systematically poisoned by my caretaker. Maybe you're right, I said weakly. I do feel quite confused lately. That afternoon, I took another bus ride to the library to check on my test results. The news was exactly what I'd expected, and far worse than I'd hoped. Ma'am, the lab technician said when I called from the payphone, I need you to contact the police immediately. These samples contain lethal levels of multiple toxins, arsenic, digitalis compounds, and several plant alkaloids that are extremely dangerous. At the concentrations we found, someone could die from chronic exposure. Die from chronic exposure. That certainly put things in perspective. How long would it take? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. With levels this high, building over time, maybe 2 more weeks before organ failure becomes irreversible. 2 weeks. Sarah's timeline was more aggressive than I'd realized. That evening, I called Robert Chen from the same payphone. Robert, it's Margaret Wilson. I need to see you urgently, but no one can know about it. And whatever you do, don't call me at home. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to wonder if the connection had been lost. Margaret, he finally said, are you in some kind of trouble? The worst kind, I replied. The kind where someone is trying to kill me and they're almost succeeding. Another silence. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Use the side entrance and don't tell anyone where you're going. I'll be there, I said. And Robert, bring a criminal attorney. I'm going to need one. When I got home, Sarah was preparing my evening tea with her usual cheerful efficiency. Here you go, Mom, she said, handing me what I now knew was a carefully calibrated dose of multiple poisons. This should help with your restlessness. I took the mug with hands that were no longer trembling from toxins, but from pure adrenaline. "Thank you, dear," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "You've been taking such good care of me." "It's my pleasure," she replied with that perfect smile. "That's what family is for." Family. Right. In less than 24 hours, I was going to find out exactly what this family was really capable of. And more importantly, I was going to start fighting back. But first, I had to survive one more night in a house where someone was trying to murder me with kindness and herbal tea. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harold had always joked that I was too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. "Someday," he'd said, "that's going to get you in trouble." Well, someday had arrived. But fortunately, so had my survival instinct. And tomorrow, the real game would begin. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me want to rake leaves and bake apple pies. Instead, I was sneaking out of my son's house like some kind of geriatric secret agent, armed with a folder full of evidence that my daughter-in-law was trying to murder me. Life takes some interesting turns when you hit your late 60s. I told Sarah I was going to the library to return some books, which wasn't entirely a lie, since I did have a stack of mystery novels that were overdue. The irony of late fees on books about solving murders while actively investigating my own attempted homicide wasn't lost on me. "Take your time, Mom," Sarah said with that sweet smile that now made my skin crawl. "Maybe stop by the pharmacy and pick up some more of those vitamins Dr. Patterson recommended. You know how forgetful you've been lately." Forgetful? Right. As if forgetting where I put my reading glasses was comparable to not noticing someone was slowly poisoning me to death. Robert Chen's law office was in one of those converted Victorian houses that lawyers seem to love, all dark wood and heavy furniture, designed to make you feel like serious business was being conducted. I'd been there many times over the years with Harold, usually for pleasant things like updating our wills or handling the house purchase. This visit was decidedly less pleasant. Robert was waiting for me, along with a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger than me by about 20 years, with sharp eyes and the kind of posture that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Margaret, this is Detective Sarah Martinez," Robert said as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "She specializes in elder abuse cases." Detective Martinez. Of course, Sarah's name would be Sarah, too. The universe apparently had a sense of humor about these things. "Mrs. Wilson," Detective Martinez said, "Mr. Chen has given me a general overview of your situation, but I'd like to hear the details directly from you." So I told them everything. The gradual onset of symptoms, David's reaction to the tea, my covert investigation, Sarah's notebook, the lab results. I showed them the photographs I'd taken, handed over the test results from the lab, and laid out the timeline of my deterioration. When I finished, Detective Martinez was making notes in a small pad, her expression grim but focused. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, "what you're describing is systematic poisoning with intent to commit murder. This is not just elder abuse. This is attempted homicide." "I was afraid you'd say that," I replied, "though I suppose I was hoping you'd tell me I was being paranoid." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Robert interjected, reviewing the lab reports. "These toxin levels are clearly not accidental. Someone has been deliberately administering multiple poisons over an extended period. The question now," Detective Martinez continued, "is how we proceed. We have strong evidence, but we need to be strategic about how we handle this. If your daughter-in-law realizes you're onto her, she might accelerate her timeline or try to silence you more directly." More directly. That was a cheerful thought. "What do you recommend?" I asked. Detective Martinez leaned forward. "We're going to set up a controlled confrontation. We'll wire you for sound, have officers nearby, and get her to confess on tape. But first, we need to document your current physical condition and make sure you're medically stable." "Am I?" I asked. suddenly worried. Medically stable, I mean. That's what we're going to find out, Robert said, reaching for his phone. I'm calling Dr. Patricia Brennan. She's an independent physician who works with the county on forensic cases. She'll examine you and document the extent of the poisoning. An hour later, I was sitting in Dr. Brennan's office, submitting to the most thorough medical examination I'd had since Harold's health crisis. Blood draws, urine tests, neurological assessments, the works. Mrs. Wilson, Dr. Brennan said after reviewing my test results, I need you to understand how serious this situation is. You have significant levels of heavy metals in your system, along with plant alkaloids that are affecting your cardiovascular and nervous systems. If you'd continued this exposure for another week or two— She didn't need to finish the sentence. But I'll recover? I asked. With proper treatment, yes. The good news is that you recognized the problem and stopped the exposure before permanent damage occurred. You're going to need chelation therapy to remove the heavy metals, and we'll monitor your organ function closely, but I'm optimistic about your recovery. Recovery. That was the best word I'd heard in weeks. How long will it take? I asked. A few months for the toxins to clear your system completely, but you should start feeling significantly better within a few weeks. Dr. Brennan prescribed medications to help my body eliminate the poisons and gave me strict instructions about hydration and rest. She also provided detailed medical reports documenting the poisoning, which Detective Martinez assured me would be crucial evidence. By the time I left Dr. Brennan's office, it was almost 4 p.m. I'd been gone for 6 hours, which was going to require some creative explaining to Sarah. I called home from a payphone. Mom, where have you been? Sarah's voice carried just the right note of worried concern. You said you were going to the library, but you've been gone all day. I was starting to get frightened. Frightened that her murder victim had escaped, more likely. I'm so sorry, dear, I said, putting a quaver in my voice that wasn't entirely manufactured. I got confused at the library and couldn't remember how to get home. A nice young man had to help me call a taxi. It was a plausible story for someone supposedly experiencing cognitive decline, and it explained both my absence and why I might seem disoriented when I got home. Oh, Mom, Sarah's voice was pure sympathy. I think your condition is progressing faster than we realized. Maybe we should call Dr. Patterson first thing Monday morning. Maybe you're right, I agreed weakly. I'm so confused lately. Just come home, Sarah said. I'll make you some tea and you can rest. Tea, of course. That sounds lovely, dear. I'll be home soon. When the taxi dropped me off, Sarah was waiting at the door with that concerned expression she'd perfected. But now I could see the calculation behind it, the way she was assessing my condition, looking for signs of the progression she expected. You look exhausted, Mom, she observed, helping me with my jacket. And pale. This kind of confusion episode can be very draining. I feel terrible, I admitted, which was actually true. Not because of the poisoning, the effects of that were finally starting to fade, but because of the emotional exhaustion of discovering that someone I'd trusted was trying to kill me. Let's get you settled, Sarah said, guiding me to Harold's old recliner. I'll make your tea and then you can rest. She bustled around the kitchen, preparing my evening dose of poison with the efficiency of someone who'd had plenty of practice. I watched her through new eyes, noting the careful way she measured ingredients, the way she stirred the mixture, the satisfaction in her expression as she brought me the steaming mug. Here you go, she said, settling into the chair across from me. This should help with your anxiety about today's confusion. I took the mug with trembling hands, though the trembling was from adrenaline, not toxins. Thank you, Sarah. You're so good to me. It's my pleasure, Mom. That's what family does. We take care of each other. Family. The word had taken on such a different meaning over the past week. I raised the mug to my lips, pretending to sip while actually letting the liquid barely touch my mouth. The taste was familiar now, bitter herbs trying to mask something more sinister. All of it, Mom, Sarah encouraged when I lowered the mug after a few fake sips. You know the herbs work better when you get the full dose? The full dose. How thoughtful of her to be so concerned about proper dosage. I pretended to drink the rest, using the napkin palming technique I'd perfected over the past week. Sarah watched with satisfaction as I drained the mug. "There," she said, taking the empty cup. "Now you should start feeling more relaxed soon." Relaxed. That was one word for it. "I think I'll go to bed early," I said, standing on deliberately shaky legs. "That's a good idea," Sarah agreed. "You need your rest after such a confusing day." In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. Tomorrow, Detective Martinez would brief me on the confrontation plan. Soon, I'd have to face Sarah directly and get her to confess to trying to murder me. But first, I had to make it through another night in this house of lies. I changed into my nightgown and brushed my teeth, following my normal routine. But as I was getting ready for bed, I heard voices from the kitchen. Sarah was on the phone with someone, and she didn't sound like the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law she'd been playing for months. I crept to my door and listened. "Progressing faster than expected," Sarah was saying. "The confusion episode today was significant. I think we're looking at days, not weeks." Days, not weeks. That was an interesting way to discuss someone's supposed cognitive decline. "No, I don't think we need to adjust the mixture again," she continued. "The current levels are working well. Any higher, and it might look suspicious if there's an autopsy." Autopsy. How considerate of her to think ahead. "Yes, Mom, I know what I'm doing," Sarah said, clearly talking to her accomplice mother. "We've done this before, remember? It just takes patience." "We've done this before." So I wasn't their first victim. I was just the latest in what sounded like a family tradition of murdering inconvenient, elderly relatives. "The will situation is handled," Sarah continued. "David thinks the changes were her idea, and she was so confused when we went to the lawyer that she barely knew what she was signing." My blood ran cold. What changes? What will? "Once it's over, we'll have clear ownership of her assets, plus David's inheritance from his father. It'll be enough to pay off our debts and still have plenty left over." Our debts. So this wasn't just about my money. Sarah and David were in financial trouble. But wait, did David know about this, or was he another victim of Sarah's manipulation? "I have to go," Sarah said suddenly. "She might hear me, but everything's on track. By next weekend, we'll be planning a funeral instead of worrying about creditors." By next weekend, I'd be dead. I heard Sarah moving around the kitchen, probably cleaning up from her poison preparation. I quickly got into bed and pretended to be asleep, my mind racing with this new information. Sarah had forged my will. She and her mother had killed before, and they planned to have me dead within a week. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated a 68-year-old woman's survival instinct and her willingness to fight back. Tomorrow, I'd start building the case that would put them behind bars. Tonight, I just had to stay alive. As I lay in the darkness, listening to Sarah move around the house, I thought about Harold. He'd always said I was tougher than I looked, that I had a core of steel underneath all the maternal softness. "Someday," he'd told me, "you're going to surprise everyone, including yourself, with just how strong you really are." Well, Harold, someday had arrived, and I was about to show Sarah and her murderous mother exactly what this old woman was capable of. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and this time, I was going to win. Monday morning, Detective Martinez called me at the library payphone with the plan. "Mrs. Wilson, we're going to set up a family dinner for tomorrow night," she explained. "You'll tell Sarah you want to discuss some important financial matters, updating your will, maybe consolidating your accounts, something that would make her think she's close to achieving her goal." "Won't she be suspicious?" I asked. "I've been acting so confused lately." "That's actually perfect," Martinez replied. "People with cognitive decline often have moments of clarity, especially about financial matters. She'll think you're having a lucid moment and want to take advantage of it." The plan was elegantly simple. I'd invite Sarah to dinner to discuss my estate planning concerns. Detective Martinez and several officers would be positioned around the house. I'd be wearing a wire, and there would be hidden cameras recording everything. The key, Martinez explained, is to get her talking about your symptoms, about the tea, about her expectations for your timeline. If we can get her to admit she's been giving you something, or that she expects you to deteriorate further, we'll have what we need. What about David? I asked. Will he be there? That's up to you. Do you think he's involved? I thought about the conversation I'd overheard, about Sarah's comment that David thought the will changes were my idea. I don't think so, I said. I think he's been manipulated too, but he might be useful as a witness if Sarah says something incriminating. Agreed. Having him there might also make Sarah feel more confident, more likely to let her guard down. That evening I called David at work. Honey, could you and Sarah come over for dinner tomorrow night? I've been thinking about my finances, and I'd like to discuss some changes with both of you. Mom, are you feeling all right? David sounded concerned. You've been so confused lately, and talking about financial planning seems... I'm having a good day, I said, which was actually true. Dr. Brennan started me on some new supplements, and I'm feeling much clearer. I want to take advantage of it while I can. Dr. Brennan, that wasn't a lie. She had started me on medication, just not the kind David was thinking of. That's great, Mom, David said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Sarah will be so pleased. She's been so worried about you. Sarah's concern. Right. Tell her I'll make that pot roast she likes, I added, and I'll pick up some of that wine you brought last time. Sounds perfect. We'll be there at 6. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house and tried to prepare mentally for what was coming. Tomorrow night, I'd be face to face with someone who'd been systematically poisoning me for weeks, trying to get her to confess while pretending I didn't know she was a murderer. It was going to require the performance of several lifetimes. But I'd been practicing all week, and I was ready. Sarah had taught me how to be deceptive, how to smile while planning something terrible, how to hide my true intentions behind a mask of concern. Tomorrow night, I was going to use those lessons against her. And unlike her, I was going to be fighting for something worth saving. My life. Tuesday evening arrived with all the fanfare of an execution date, which, considering the circumstances, was probably appropriate. I spent the day preparing for what Detective Martinez had cheerfully called the most important dinner party of your life. No pressure there. The technical crew had arrived early, disguised as cable repair workers, and wired my dining room like a television studio. Hidden cameras in the flower arrangement, microphones in the light fixture, recording equipment in the basement. If Martha Stewart ever decided to go into the surveillance business, this would be her masterpiece. Detective Martinez briefed me one final time while the technicians finished their work. Remember, Mrs. Wilson, your goal is to get Sarah talking about your condition, about her expectations for your health, about the tea. Don't push too hard. Let her lead the conversation. People like her enjoy feeling superior, especially to their victims. And if she doesn't take the bait, I asked, then we'll try again. But based on what you've told me about her personality, I think she will. She's been playing this role for months. She's not going to be able to resist the opportunity to consolidate her victory. The pot roast was in the oven, filling the house with the kind of homey smell that usually meant family togetherness and comfortable conversation. Today it felt more like the last meal before a hanging. At exactly 6 o'clock, David and Sarah arrived, bearing wine and Sarah's practiced smile. "Mom, you look wonderful," David said, giving me a hug. "Much better than you have in weeks." "I'm feeling clearer today," I said, which was true in ways he couldn't imagine. "It's like a fog has lifted." "That's marvelous," Sarah added, though I caught the slight tightness around her eyes. "I hope it continues." I'm sure she did. A clear-headed victim might ask uncomfortable questions. We settled into the dining room, and I served the pot roast with all the maternal warmth I could muster. For several minutes, it felt almost normal. A family dinner, complete with David's stories about work and Sarah's comments about redecorating their living room. But Detective Martinez's words echoed in my mind. Let her lead the conversation. You mentioned wanting to discuss financial matters, Mom, Sarah said as we finished the main course. What kind of changes are you thinking about? There was the opening I'd been waiting for. Well, I said, putting on my most vulnerable expression, I've been so confused lately, and I realize I haven't been very organized about my affairs. If something happens to me— Nothing's going to happen to you, Mom, David interjected quickly. Oh, honey, we have to be realistic, Sarah said with that perfect blend of compassion and pragmatism. Your mother has been experiencing some significant cognitive changes. It's important to plan ahead. Cognitive changes. How clinical that sounded. That's just it, I continued. Sometimes I feel so foggy, like my brain isn't working right, and other times, like today, I feel almost normal. It's frightening not knowing which version of myself I'm going to be. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. That's very common with your condition, Mom. The decline isn't always linear. You'll have good days and bad days, but unfortunately, the trajectory is generally downward. Unfortunately. She almost managed to sound genuinely regretful. How much worse do you think it will get? I asked, playing the frightened elderly woman perfectly. Well, Sarah said carefully, glancing at David, every case is different. But typically, with the kind of symptoms you've been showing, the confusion, the memory problems, the physical weakness, people tend to decline fairly rapidly. How rapidly? I pressed. Sarah exchanged another look with David, as if she were reluctant to burden him with difficult truths. Usually, once these symptoms start appearing, we're looking at months rather than years, she said gently. I know that's hard to hear, but it's better to be prepared. Months rather than years. If she only knew how accurate that assessment was, just not for the reasons she was implying. Maybe I should update my will, I said, looking confused and overwhelmed. Make sure everything is in order. That's very wise, Sarah agreed immediately. In fact, remember we went to see that lawyer a few weeks ago. You were having a particularly difficult day, but we managed to get some important changes made to your documents. David looked surprised. What changes? Mom, you didn't mention— She was very confused that day, Sarah said smoothly. The lawyer was concerned about her mental state, but she was insistent about making some adjustments to her beneficiaries. Weren't you, Mom? This was news to me. Apparently, Sarah had been even busier than I'd realized. I don't remember very clearly, I said, which was entirely honest. What kind of adjustments? Just some modifications to make sure your assets are distributed efficiently, Sarah explained. You were worried about tax implications, estate planning, that sort of thing. The lawyer helped simplify everything. Simplified. I was sure it was very simplified. Straight into Sarah's pockets. I'm glad someone is looking out for my interests, I said weakly. Sometimes I feel like such a burden. You're not a burden, Mom, David protested, but Sarah had a different perspective. It's natural to feel that way, she said with practiced sympathy. Caring for someone with declining health is challenging for everyone involved. But that's why it's so important to have these difficult conversations while you're still able to participate. While I'm still able to participate, as opposed to when I'm dead, presumably. The tea you make for me helps, I said, deciding to test the waters. I always sleep so deeply after drinking it. That's wonderful, Sarah said, her face lighting up. The herbal blend is working exactly as intended. My grandmother always said that deep sleep is crucial for healing. What's in it exactly? I asked with innocent curiosity. Oh, various herbs, Sarah said vaguely. Chamomile, lavender, passion flower, and a few special ingredients that are particularly beneficial for someone in your condition. Special ingredients. How thoughtfully she put it. I notice I feel more tired during the day since I started drinking it, I observed. Is that normal? Absolutely, Sarah confirmed. As your body processes the herbs and begins to heal, you'll experience increased fatigue. It's actually a sign that the treatment is working. Treatment. She was calling it treatment now. How long do you think I'll need to keep drinking it? I asked. Sarah paused, and I could practically see her calculating. Well, that depends on how your condition progresses, she said finally. Some people need the herbal support for weeks, others for months. We'll just have to see how you respond. But you'll know when I don't need it anymore? I pressed. Oh, yes, Sarah said with absolute confidence. When the time comes, it will be very clear. I'm sure it would be. Dead people don't need herbal tea. David had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Sarah, maybe we should ask Dr. Patterson about this herbal treatment. Make sure it's not interacting with Mom's other medications. I saw Sarah's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Dr. Patterson is aware of the tea, she said. I mentioned it during her last visit. He said herbal remedies are perfectly safe for someone in her condition. That was interesting. I'd been there for that visit, and I didn't remember Sarah mentioning the tea at all. But then again, I was supposed to be confused and forgetful. I just want to make sure we're doing everything right, David continued. Mom means everything to me. I couldn't bear it if something happened to her. Nothing is going to happen, Sarah said firmly, reaching over to pat his hand. As long as she follows her routine, takes her vitamins, drinks her tea, gets proper rest, she'll be as comfortable as possible for as long as possible. For as long as possible. Another interesting choice of words. What if I stopped drinking the tea? I asked suddenly. Would that be dangerous? Sarah's reaction was immediate and telling. Her eyes widened slightly and her hand tightened on David's. Oh, you can't stop now, Mom, she said quickly. Your body has adjusted to the herbal compounds. Stopping suddenly could cause complications. What kind of complications? Well, Sarah said, clearly improvising, withdrawal symptoms, increased anxiety, possibly even seizures. The herbs have become essential to your system's balance. Essential to my system's balance. That was one way to describe addiction to poison. I see, I said meekly. I had no idea it was so important. That's why you need people looking out for you, Sarah said, relaxing again. These medical decisions are too complex for someone in your condition to make alone. I'm so grateful to have you both, I said, looking at them with what I hoped appeared to be genuine affection. I don't know what would happen to me without your care. You don't have to worry about that, Sarah assured me. We're going to take care of you for as long as you need us. For as long as I need them, which, according to her timeline, would be about another week. At that moment, right on cue, my phone rang. It was Detective Martinez, calling with our prearranged signal. Excuse me, I said, getting up to answer it. It might be Dr. Patterson returning my call. Mrs. Wilson, Detective Martinez said, how are things going? Oh, hello, Doctor, I said loudly enough for Sarah and David to hear. Yes, I'm feeling much better today. Thank you for asking. We've got everything we need, Martinez whispered. Her statements about the tea, about your timeline, about the will changes, it's all recorded. We're ready to move in. I see, I said to the phone. And you'll be here in a few minutes to discuss the test results? That's wonderful. I hung up and returned to the table. Dr. Patterson is coming by to discuss some test results, I announced. He said it was important enough to make a house call. Sarah went very still. Test results? She asked carefully. What kind of tests? Oh, some blood work he ordered, I said casually. Something about checking my vitamin levels and making sure there aren't any underlying causes for my confusion. The color drained from Sarah's face so fast I thought she might faint. Mom, she said urgently, maybe we should reschedule. You've had such a good day and medical visits can be so overwhelming. It's fine, dear, I interrupted. He said it would just take a few minutes. The doorbell rang. That must be him now, I said, getting up to answer it. But instead of Dr. Patterson, Detective Martinez stood on my doorstep, flanked by two uniformed officers. Good evening, Mrs. Wilson, she said in a voice loud enough to carry to the dining room. I'm Detective Martinez with the County Sheriff's Department. We're here about the test results. I heard a chair crash over in the dining room, followed by Sarah's voice. David, we need to leave. Now. Sarah Williams, Detective Martinez called out as we walked into the dining room, where Sarah was frantically gathering her purse while David stared in confusion. You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Margaret Wilson. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face cycled through expressions like a broken slideshow: shock, denial, calculation, and finally, rage. "This is ridiculous," she snarled, and suddenly the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by something cold and vicious. "She's a confused old woman who's been having paranoid delusions." "Ma'am," Detective Martinez said calmly, "we have recordings of this evening's conversation in which you admitted to giving Mrs. Wilson substances you knew were harmful, discussed her expected timeline for deterioration, and acknowledged forging legal documents." "I never said any of that," Sarah snapped. "Actually," I said, speaking for the first time since the police arrived, "you did. All of it." Sarah whirled to face me, and for the first time I saw her without any pretense. The mask was completely gone, revealing someone who looked at me with pure, concentrated hatred. "You," she spat. "You've been faking it, acting more confused than you really were." "Actually," I said conversationally, "I've been feeling much better since I stopped drinking your tea. Amazing what a difference that made." "You stopped?" Sarah cut herself off, realizing she was about to confess to something else, but it was too late. Detective Martinez smiled. "Thank you for confirming that the tea was the delivery method," she said. "That will make the charges much simpler to explain to a jury." David, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Sarah," he said in a voice I barely recognized, "what is she talking about? What charges? What tea?" Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so contemptuous. "Your mother," she said, "has been a very sick woman. Sicker than anyone realized." "From the poison you've been giving her," Detective Martinez clarified helpfully. David's face went through its own series of expressions, landing finally on horrified comprehension. "The tea," he said slowly, "the tea you gave me that day. I felt exactly like I've been feeling every night for 6 weeks. I finished. Dizzy, confused, nauseated. The difference is your symptoms went away. Mine were getting worse." "Sarah," David whispered, "tell me this isn't true." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and I saw her make a calculation. She could continue denying, keep up the pretense, hope somehow to talk her way out of this. Instead, she chose honesty, or at least her version of it. "It would have been quick," she said matter-of-factly, "and peaceful. She would have just gone to sleep one night and not woken up. Natural causes, no suffering." David recoiled as if she'd slapped him. "Natural causes?" he repeated. "You were poisoning my mother." "We were broke, David," Sarah exploded. "Completely, utterly broke. The house, the cars, everything. It was all financed with credit we couldn't afford. We were going to lose it all within months." "So you decided to murder my mother for her inheritance?" "I decided to solve our problems," Sarah corrected. "She's old, David. She was going to die soon anyway. This way, at least her death would mean something." The casual way she discussed my murder was almost more chilling than the act itself. "Sarah Williams," Detective Martinez said, stepping forward with handcuffs, "you have the right to remain silent." But Sarah wasn't interested in remaining silent. Once the dam had burst, everything came flooding out. "You want to know about the tea?" she said as the handcuffs clicked shut. "My mother taught me. Foxglove for the heart problems, oleander for the digestive issues, a little arsenic for the confusion and memory loss. All natural ingredients that would just accelerate the natural aging process." "Sarah, stop talking," one of the officers advised, but she was past caring. "We've done this before," she continued, looking directly at me with those cold eyes. "My grandmother, my aunt, David's uncle when he was inconveniently healthy at 92. Old people die, Detective. Sometimes they just need a little help." Detective Martinez was taking notes furiously. And you kept records of Mrs. Wilson's deterioration? Of course I kept records, Sarah said with pride. I'm not an amateur. Proper dosage is crucial. Too little and the process takes too long, too much and it looks suspicious. The notebook in your purse, I said, week by week, tracking my symptoms. You went through my purse? Sarah looked genuinely offended, as if privacy violations were somehow worse than attempted murder. I also found the powder your mother sent, I added, with instructions on proper usage. Sarah's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. You have been busy, she acknowledged. I underestimated you. Yes, I agreed. You did. As they led Sarah away, she called back over her shoulder. You can't prove any of this in court. Herbal tea isn't illegal. Old people forget things. You're still just a confused widow who got paranoid. Detective Martinez paused at the door. Mrs. Williams, we have lab results showing lethal levels of multiple toxins in tea samples collected from your victim's home. We have recordings of you admitting to poisoning her. We have your written records documenting her deterioration, and we have your confession given in front of witnesses. She smiled. Trust me, we can prove it. After they left, David and I sat in the sudden quiet of the dining room. The pot roast was getting cold, the wine was unfinished, and my son looked like someone had just told him the world was ending. Mom, he said finally, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. I thought you were just grieving, adjusting badly to life without Dad. She's very good at what she does, I said gently. I almost believed it myself. How did you figure it out? So I told him. About serving him the tea, about his phone call, about the horrible realization that followed. I told him about the secret investigation, the lab results, the evidence gathering. You could have died, he said when I finished. I nearly did, I replied. According to the doctors, I had maybe 2 more weeks before the damage became irreversible. David put his head in his hands. I married a serial killer, he said. I brought a serial killer into our family, and she almost murdered my mother. David, you couldn't have known. She was very convincing. I should have protected you. That's what sons are supposed to do. Honey, you were being manipulated just as much as I was. She's had years to perfect her technique. We sat in silence for a while, both of us trying to process what had just happened. What happens now? David asked eventually. Now, I said, I get healthy. The doctors say I should make a full recovery with treatment, and you get a divorce and start over with someone who won't try to murder your relatives for insurance money. And Sarah? Goes to prison for attempted murder, if there's any justice in the world. Detective Martinez called the next day with updates. Sarah's mother had been arrested at her home, where they'd found an entire collection of herbal remedies that were actually sophisticated poisons. Sarah had confessed to involvement in 4 previous deaths, all elderly relatives who had died of apparent natural causes. The good news, Martinez told me, is that Sarah's confession is so detailed and so incriminating that her lawyers are already talking about a plea bargain. She'll go to prison, probably for the rest of her life. And the will she mentioned? Completely fraudulent. The real lawyer she claimed to visit has no record of any meeting. She forged everything, including your signature. Your actual will is still valid. So I would recover my health, my assets, and my life. Not a bad outcome for someone who'd been scheduled to die the following week. 6 months later, I was living in a lovely senior community across town, in an apartment that was entirely my own. David visited regularly, sometimes bringing his new girlfriend, a veterinarian named Claire, who was kind, genuine, and showed absolutely no interest in my financial situation. The chelation therapy had worked. The toxins were out of my system, and I felt better than I had in years. I'd started volunteering with an organization that educated seniors about financial abuse and family scams. Turns out there's quite a demand for someone who's survived attempted murder by tea service. Sarah was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Her mother received 25 years. The judge called it one of the most calculated and cold-blooded cases of elder abuse he'd ever seen. At the sentencing, Sarah looked at me one final time. "You should have just died quietly," she said. "It would have been easier for everyone." "Maybe," I replied, "but I've never been very good at doing what's easy." And I meant it. At 68, I'd learned that I was tougher, smarter, and more resilient than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. Harold would have been proud. These days, I make my own tea, Earl Grey, nothing fancy. And every time I take that first sip, I remember that I'm alive to taste it because I trusted my instincts, fought for my life, and refused to go quietly. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's simply surviving. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more survival stories.